Excellent. And I will kick us off. So hello and a warm welcome to the WEAll Talks. For those of you who don't know, WEAll stands for a Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And we are an alliance organization with so many incredible members from across the world. And today we have one of our members sharing this topic towards global living wage with you today. They're an incredible organization. But before I introduce them, I just want to let you know that this is an hour-long conversation. We start with a presentation and end with an interactive discussion. So please be thinking about questions that you have, things that you're wanting to engage with as you're hearing the talk. Please do think of those questions so that you can pop them towards our speakers at that time. So let me introduce these incredible people from Living Wage Foundation. We have Lauren and Mona Lisa, and they're going to be making the case for paying a living wage. So they're going to give a brief introduction around the Living Wage Foundation, how the campaign started, and what actually a living wage is. We don't want to assume that everybody knows. We have a very diverse audience in terms of WEAll, so we really want to make sure that everybody's brought along this journey. And I want to also just mention that WEAll is also an accredited living wage employer, specifically in the UK and in Canada. So we're really proud about that. Yay. And then let me introduce the speakers that are going to be engaging with you today. So we have Lauren, who's the project manager and on the Global Living Wage project, and she has over 10 years experience in consulting and project management across private, public sector and charity organizations. And then we also have Mona Lisa, who is the program officer at Living Wage Foundation, and she is the regional lead for accreditors in the northeast of England and has also recently joined the Global Living Wage project. So I am going to hand over to our incredible speakers. We're going to have Mona Lisa sharing first, and then we'll go on to Lauren. So Mona Lisa, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tobile, for that warm welcome. Just going to be sharing my screen here. There we go. And yes, it's great to be here. We're really excited to speak to you all about all the work that we're doing at the Living Wage Foundation here in the UK. And I would like to thank everyone also for joining us from all the way across, all across the world. It sounds like we have a very diverse group of people in the audience today, and we're really grateful that you're taking out an hour of your day to speak to us. Before we start, I'm going to set some really quick ground rules. We have a really packed session planned for you today, where we'll be sharing information about the living wage movement and our global work. And I appreciate that there might be some questions that are coming out of the presentation as we're presenting. So can I please just ask you to pop any questions you have below in the chat, and either Lauren or I will try our best to answer them as the other person's presenting. To give you an overview of what we'll be covering, I'll start by going into the background of how the living wage movement started and how the foundation was set up. And then Lauren will go into further detail about a global living wage scheme, which convenes organizations around the world, such as yourselves, all working in the space of fair wages and that sort of thing. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with a good old-fashioned Q&A session. And I hope that sounds good for everyone. It should be pretty straightforward. So without further ado, let's just start with some context about the living wage movement and where it all began. The living wage movement started in 2001. It came out of a community organizing and grassroots campaigning coalition called the East London Communities Organisation, or TELCO, whose first meeting around the living wage is pictured on the screen over there. And this original meeting happened in London, and the initial living wage campaign was actually a London-based campaign, as that was where the affected communities were from. A lot of the campaign was born from the lived experience of people in schools and churches and mosques that were part of this East community, East London community organisation. The beginnings of the campaign focused on mainly hospitals, which had cleaners that were part of the group, and also other low-paid cleaners from Canary Wharf, which is a global financial centre in London that has big banks like HSBC and Barclays. And in these banks, the pay gap between the multi-million pound salaries of the CEOs and the managers and the minimum wage being paid to the cleaners, the gap between that was very, very evident. In fact, some of the foundational stories of the early actions that the group took involved a cleaner of the HSBC going along with the minister of their church to buy shares from HSBC and challenge the chairman of the bank was being paid millions of pounds. And the first real big win of the movement was a successful conversation that came out of this. And HSBC became one of our first partners committing to pay the real living wage to all of their workers. Our movement grew from this grassroots campaign that focused on an employer by employer basis to having the first commitment from the first hospital, the first bank, the first university. And one of the major wins that we had was the first mayors of London recognizing the living wage as an official rate. Citizens UK, which is our parent organisation that founded the movement and facilitated all of this, persuaded at the time the Mayor of London to calculate the living wage every year. It became the official London living wage with a stamp of authority from the Mayor's office, and the office started implementing the living wage in their own contracts and employment. And at this point, the campaign was engaging with businesses way outside of London, from Birmingham and Manchester. So the Living Wage Foundation was specifically set up in 2001 to deal with this demand, and it was dedicated to growing the movement and setting up an accreditation system, which is what we use now. And yes, step by step, the movement grew into the national movement it is today from that picture on the screen. So we've come quite a long way in the past 21 years. That's a bit of an overview of the background of what we started. Now, if you look more closely,
sorry, we can see your speaker notes, so you might just want to present with the other view just before you continue on. Thanks.
Sorry. Well, I guess it's accessible, so people that might not be able to hear. Sorry. Let me try that again. Thank you for alerting me, Lauren. Not sure how that's happening, but let's try this again.
That's the one. Oh no, it's gone back.
Yes. In that case, I'm not really sure how to.
It's fine otherwise.
Yeah.
Everyone can read along with it as well.
Yeah. We'll make it a double kind of accessibility point, so you can read along on the screen, or you can hear my lovely voice speaking to you and reading from it. But you can see, right, so going back to sort of what the problem of low pay is in the UK and what we're focusing on it so much is that we have a huge kind of real issue concerning the number of people that are not earning the real living wage. We have 5.5 million in the UK who are currently below the real living wage, and among this there are 24% of working women in the UK who currently can't actually earn enough to meet the everyday tasks. Also, those that are in part-time roles are disproportionately impacted by this. And Lauren will be sharing, I believe, the link to some of the research that we've done in this area, where we found that racialized groups are much more likely to be in low-paid roles than their white counterparts. And on top of all of this, as I'm sure you can all guess, the cost of living crisis and the unprecedented levels of inflation also mean that the living wage movement is now more important than ever. And paying the real living wage is, for employers, the most tangible and effective measure that they can take to ensure that their employees are taken care of, they can meet their basic needs, and they can have a good and dignified quality of life. Now, talking about what the real living wage actually is, the official definition is on the board on the left side of the screen, on the right side. It is the remuneration received per hour by worker, which is sufficient to afford a decent standard of living for the worker and their family. Things that go into it are things like housing, food, clothing, but also part of what it means to engage meaningfully with society. So any social and cultural activities and how much that costs is also factored into calculating the real living wage. This is different to what we have in the UK, the government minimum national wages. We have people joining from very different national contexts. So as a bit of an overview, we have 3 different benchmarks in the UK. And again, Lauren will be sharing a link that goes into a bit more detail about that. 2 of the benchmarks that we have is the minimum wage and the national living wage. And these are set by the government, and they're calculated on this target of achieving 66% of median earnings by 2024. However, the living wage is the only one that's calculated on the real cost of living, and it's a needs-based calculation rather than a target-based one. The government wages, so the national minimum wage and the national living wage, are compulsory, but the living wage isn't compulsory. It's actually a voluntary rate, which is paid by employers that are accredited with us. And it's a sign of their commitment to choosing to do the right thing and taking care of their employees. And currently, the real living wage is £10.90 an hour in the UK and £11.95 in London. You'll see on the board that we have 2 different rates. The reason for this is that we recognize that the cost of living in London is considerably higher than the rest of the UK. So our calculations are designed to reflect that. And that is why we have 2 different rates. And going into how the rates are actually calculated. So the calculations happen annually. We usually announce the rates in November of each year, and they're also done independently by the Resolution Foundation. And the rates themselves are chosen by an independent living wage commission, which represents an intersection of different kind of employers from civil society, charity organizations, and private sector. What goes into the actual calculations, it's based on the results from this national survey that considers a basket of goods, which are the different elements mentioned earlier in the earlier kind of calculation slide. And it's things that go into determining a good quality of life. So things like housing, food, transport, but also, as I mentioned, the price of social activities, going on holiday for some families. And this is all taken from that survey across England. The calculation also takes into consideration a range of different family sizes. So we take into consideration single parent families, families with 1 or more children, couples, single individuals in a family. And we also consider external factors that might be impacting the cost of living, such as government policy changes, universal credit, inflation, government packages, policy decisions, things like that may be having a downward impact on what the cost of living is. The Resolution Foundation collects all of this data, and then they present it to the Commission, who are responsible for making the final call of what the rates should be and how they should be implemented. And that is a little bit of a snapshot on how the calculations works. But you've heard from me now. I thought it would be good. I'm sure you would all agree that it's probably best and much more valuable to let the people that are choosing to pay this rate year on year and the people that are directly impacted by earning the living wage speak to its benefits more than I could ever. So we have a little video here.
Living wage is different to the government's national living wage. Businesses have no obligation to pay it, but we went to one that's been trying it out.
To the monthly accounts. The living wage rate went up from £9.90 to £10.90 last week. It was announced last week. We're introducing that this month. We see a value in that, and it brings out the best in our staff. It increases productivity, makes us more efficient. So we're quite happy to do that.
Me and the missus doing weekly shops, and over the past month and a half, we've noticed how much more we're spending on things, bread, butter, milk. It's just basic items. I mean, even hygiene items like deodorant, shower gel, shampoo. The wage rise has helped. It means that we're not going to struggle. Just changed our shopping habits, going around trying to find cheaper supermarkets, cheaper brands. You know, not always the best, but with the pay rise, we can go back, have a bit more luxury, paying more, you're getting more loyal staff. We're eager to come into work, we're happier to come into work rather than just sit at home.
We have been fortunate to be able to pass some of the costs on to the customers, but like many other businesses, we've taken the hit ourselves in some respects as well. What we didn't realise at the time was we were actually saving money. One of the things it did was make us more productive. It cut down the absenteeism days. And if you work on the basis that each absentee day costs you £171, we made a saving in excess of £18,000 by paying the staff more.
Now, just
And yes,
the real living wage is different to the government.
So that was a clip covered by the BBC News, which is our national media outlet, news channel. And the role of the Living Wage Foundation, which is where we are from, and in facilitating all of this and kind of helping the movement, is to gather the intelligence that's needed. So this is done through research, case studies, and also the testimonies, such as the ones that you saw. We also work by growing the employer accreditation through the different schemes that we have. And the purpose of this is to really cement that commitment that employers are making, and to make sure that they can make that commitment year on year to meet the rates based on the changing cost of living. And the final way that we help and we facilitate is by influencing. We influence different industries, we influence policymakers to ensure that the living wage becomes a baseline standard of fair pay all across the country. So what is the living wage employer accreditation? What does it look like? The living wage mark, which you can see on the screen over there, is a fair trade mark for responsible pay, which we offer to employers that accredit with us. The accreditation itself is awarded on the basis that employers meet two main requirements. The first one is that they paid all of their directly employed staff the real living wage by the time that they're accrediting. And the second requirement is that they also have a plan in place to uplift all the third-party contracted staff to the real living wage at the next legal opportunity. And for this particular part, we allow a grace period of 3 years. We ask employers to put any outstanding contracts, third-party contracts, as milestones on a document so that we can revisit them at every point of renewal and have a conversation of how that conversation is going, and check in on their progress. And in terms of the commitment, employers also commit to internally communicate that they're becoming accredited as a living wage employer, so that employees are aware of what that means. They can raise any issues that they think that they're not being paid the real living wage, and it holds them accountable. And the second thing that they commit to is also to externally communicate that they're becoming a living wage employer by having the logo on their website, email signatures, so they can also be externally held accountable if something is wrong, but also just to shout about the fact that they've made that decision, what it means for them and their reputation. Coming on to the present and how the movement has done so far, we happen to be in our strongest position to date, which is quite reassuring. As you can see on the slide, we have come really far from 2001, and when that first meeting was held in the picture. Our network now is over 12,000 accredited employers who are championing the living wage across their work in their industries. And the main way that they're doing that is by having uplifted over 400,000 workers onto the real living wage. And that is more money in workers' pockets. There is a better quality of life. And that is just more employers being more responsible and more caring about how to treat their workers. Part of this growth is due to the fact that we have a very strong business case underpinning the benefits of paying the real living wage. And one of our mottos is that paying the real living wage is not just good for people, it's also a thing that's good for business. In the earlier video, you saw the manager of Anchor Removals, one of our accredited employers, talking about his personal experience of how his business has benefited. And on the screen, you can also see some other statistics from just benefits that employers in our network have reported having. Some key themes are, again, improvements in recruitment and retention, higher morale, and just a general reputational boost in the industries that these employers work in. And finally, from me, we make it a point that we do not rest on our laurels, and we keep working to find other areas where we can be working to tackle insecure work and insecure pay. And this is why we've launched a number of different schemes that are dedicated to different industries and areas of low pay. One of them, for example, is Living Hours, which provides security of hours. It addresses the insecurity of 0-hour contracts specifically, and also unreliable notice periods. We also have taken a geographical approach with Living Wage Places scheme, which relies on building local groups and having led by the local council and having them work together to identify businesses that might be particularly relevant to a localized context or localized economies, and try to get them accredited and become part of the movement. We have recently launched Living Pensions, which is a voluntary saving target for employers who want to help workers build up a pension pot that will help them in later life throughout their retirement. And very finally, the Global Living Wage Project, which might be a bit more relevant to you and how you can engage with the movement, is specifically aimed at sharing our own learnings and convening other global movements that work together in the space. And yes, to explain a bit more on that, I will pass over to Lauren.
Thank you, Mona Lisa, and I will just share my slides now as well. Let's give me 1 second. Right. Can everyone see my slides? Just nod. Yep, perfect.
Yes.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's really great to be here and really excited to be able to talk to you about the work that we're doing, specifically on the Global Living Wage Project, which, yes, Mona Lisa said, it's a project within the Living Wage Foundation, something that we've been working on over sort of the last 5 years or so. So kind of the first question, I think, is really why are we working globally? I'm just hoping that my slides are going to change so I can talk you through a bit more of that. There we go. Perfect. So as you can see from the figure on the screen, being employed doesn't necessarily mean that you have a decent standard of life. That figures from the International Labour Organization. So it shows that being employed offers no guarantee of financial safety. We believe that a fundamental shift in approach to tackling inequality is really needed. And we want to work with businesses who aim to be that force for good by implementing living wages across their global operations and using their platform to encourage others to do the same. And to start with, really, the focus on the global work was driven by a couple of different things. We were seeing a growing number of multinational employers who were part of our living wage employer network in the UK, wanting to understand more about how they could do similar work to what they've done in the UK, but across the rest of their global operations. And also movements from other countries were connecting with us, and we were discussing whether any of the work that we've done in the UK could be replicated in different local contexts as well. And from working in this space, we've really identified sort of two barriers to the provision of living wages globally. And one is around sort of, I guess, a lack of collaboration within sort of larger global organizations to like implement living wages, getting different departments talking to each other, which is something that we discuss with employers quite a lot. And also lack of collaboration between certain, like some living wage initiatives. There's lots out there, but it's all around how we promote visibility of the different pieces, different angles that we're all working on, and have that collaboration. So the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years has been to address some of those challenges. So the aims of the Global Living Wage Project, we know our expertise at the foundation is in accreditation for directly employed and contracted staff, something we kind of call own operations. So we're focusing on how we can use this experience, as well as our role as a convener and a collaborator with some of the other global initiatives that might be working on more supply chain focused or product focused initiatives, such as bananas or tea or textiles, so that we're covering all levels of the value chain that organizations might be working in. And we're doing this through a number of different ways, so similar to sort of how we're looking at this at the foundation as well. So accreditation, where we're celebrating the leadership of employers that pay the real living wage. And we're expanding on this with a new network, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is all around affiliation. So working with other national level accreditation bodies that are doing something similar to what we're doing in the UK, to ensure that there's kind of globally aligned best practice on accreditation. And that helps us to bring in those multinationals that want to do the same work in different locations. intelligence, so providing support and advice to employers implementing living wages across global operations. And we can share what other national organisations are doing, as well as what organisations who are focusing on sort of global living wages are doing as well. And then finally, influence again, so how we bring together those different stakeholders that really make a living wage movement, so across civil society, trade unions, employers and political allies, to promote the living wage globally, because it really is all about building that movement together, which is sort of what Mona Lisa spoke about right at the start. So all of this comes together in the 3 different networks that we've got on the global project. So the first is our Global Living Wage Affiliate Network, and we've just launched it this month, so it's all new and exciting over here. So this network offers multinational employers an approach to living wages across global operations, and it's made up of national level accreditation bodies similar to the Living Wage Foundation that have a globally aligned approach to recognising employers that pay a real living wage to their staff. And members will operate according to some shared best practice criteria around methodology and calculation, accreditation policy and compliance. So whilst sort of maintaining consistency in these areas, members also work with a wide range of local stakeholders to make sure living wages are relevant to that local context. So we'll always be encouraging the sort of movement to be built locally, because that's where the understanding of what it means to have a decent standard of life comes from. So we've launched this new network with an organisation called Living Wage for Us as the first member. And living wage for us is it's a US operated accreditation scheme, very similar to what we do in the foundation as well. And we look forward to growing the number of affiliate network members over the coming months to include some of the other accreditation bodies that exist currently as well. And I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute. So why the US though? In the US, wages are profoundly out of line with the basic needs of working families, and over half of Americans are paid less than a living wage. So their minimum wage is really vastly different to their living wage amounts they've got there. And yeah, the US is looking to support employers to pay the living wage in the area. So in terms of the impact that it's had so far, it's been in operation for about a year so far, and it's already put $100 million back into the pockets of low-paid workers. So you can see the impact that it's having in this short space of time, and a lot of that is to do with the context of the US at the moment in terms of that minimum wage rate. So why do we actually create this network in the first place, and what's the problem that we're trying to address by building it? So the diversity of the economic conditions in the world means that it's not practical to always think about in terms of setting one fixed benchmark of pay or one fixed approach at a global level. So we want to create alignment in these areas, but also maintain that local specificity, so we can make it easier for organisations to pay living wages and really know that the calculations are robust in the areas that they're paying those wages in. And what do we mean by this kind of approach of global consistency and local flexibility? So the differences in the availability of data and social norms about work and family life and what constitutes a decent standard of living will vary in different countries, making sort of single methodology very challenging. There are also sort of valid differences and opinions around how things should be implemented and rules of accreditation schemes. So that's why it's important that, you know, these approaches are developed locally in the ground in those different countries, and that they are developed alongside different stakeholders such as civil society, research groups, and people within those communities. But to help address some of those questions from employers, that's why we looked at this approach of building this network, creating that sort of minimum set of requirements. And for as an example, in the US, we've got many similarities in terms of some of the components of like the basket of goods that we consider for living wages, that it's for directly employed and third-party staff, it's calculated annually, it has the same implementation timeline, all things that make it slightly simpler for then employers to kind of go on and implement these things across different nations. But there are also key differences that are really important to recognise. So, for example, in the UK, Mona Lisa presented that we've got a wage for London, but also a wage for the rest of the UK. And in the States, they've actually got a wage rate per county within each state. So it's a lot more detailed, but it's because of the vast difference across the states that's the reason why they need to do it in that way. And they also consider things like in-kind benefits because that's such a big part of pay in the US as well. So there will always be differences in these approaches, but we're trying to kind of capture that baseline. If you would like to find out more about this network, we're actually hosting an event in a couple of weeks' time on the 11th of April between 4 and 5 p.m. BST. So yeah, please do sign up and come along if you'd like to know some more information. I think Mona Lisa is going to share a little bit about that in the chat as well. So our second network is a more informal global living wage network made up of any national movement that is working on living wages, and I've captured those in the screen here, and I'm really happy to share links about these different movements as well if it's an area of interest depending on where you're located. And this network focuses on alliance building and learning, and members use this space to share best practice and develop sort of living wage strategies appropriate for their different local contexts. And basically it's just a space for us to all learn from each other because we're all approaching things in slightly different ways or at different parts of the living wage journey in terms of how we're developing our own national movements. So you'll see in the top left-hand corner, we've got the Living Wage Foundation, Living Wage for Us as the national accreditation schemes that I just talked about. So that means that we both adhere to a similar set of criteria to provide consistency. But there's also other national accreditation schemes that exist and we're connected with, and we'll be looking to work with them to join the affiliate network if that's what they would like to do as well. So you'll see Canada there, and they also talked about this as well in terms of WEAll accrediting with them, which is brilliant news. They have a number of different living wage organisations, one for each province in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. It doesn't cover all of the provinces, but they have a number of ones that are covered. There's Living Wage New Zealand, and there's Caritas Jersey, which is a charity that provides accreditation for Jersey. And all of these will have benchmarks as well as providing an accreditation offering. And then there are some national benchmarks there as well. So the Republic of Ireland, they have a benchmark for a single adult without any dependents as their main benchmark, but they do also provide some calculations for different family types too. And in Singapore, there's researchers at a university that have calculated a living wage rate for Singapore, and they use something called the minimum income standard, which is very similar to what we do in the UK. There's AMB, which is the metropolitan area of Barcelona, and they've calculated a rate for Barcelona based on multiple household types. There's the Czech Republic, and they've calculated a minimum decent wage for Prague. And then there's Hong Kong as well. So Oxfam is leading the work on living wages in Hong Kong, and they are releasing a benchmark there and launching that, I think, in April this year as well. There's also other national living wage movements that are at different stages of their journey. So for example, South Africa is working on building their business case. Bermuda is working with the government, interestingly enough, to calculate a living wage rate. And they've recently decided on a minimum wage rate that they'll be using too. And then there's Social Compact, which is a multi-stakeholder platform that seeks to ensure greater dignity and equity for vulnerable workers and their families in India. So there's lots of different things happening across other countries as well in the living wage space. And what we just try to do is connect together to share these learnings and to share with others about the great work that each one's doing. So the final part, or the final network, is really to try and help us answer the question that we've got on the slide here. So with so many different initiatives, how do I know where to start? What direction do I come in from? So we are creating a network called the Living Wage Alliance, which is made up of organisations working on living wages, so nationally, globally, for their own operations or in the supply chain. And this main objective is to grow the movement and amplify the work of organisations represented and encourage collaboration. And we're really trying to do this to not recreate anything that anyone's doing, but to really just publicise the work that others are doing in this space as well. So yeah, I guess in recent years, the interest of living wages has surged, but there's been a lack of visibility around who's working on what. And throughout 2021, the Foundation, along with Living Wage for Us and a couple of other organisations, Share Action, UN Global Compact, and the World Benchmarking Alliance, convened stakeholders from across the movement to try and address this issue and figure out what to do about it, really. And this is the output. It's the Global Living Wage Digital Explorer. I've crudely put a screenshot of it here on the slide, but we will be releasing the link for this on the 11th of April as well at the event that we're running, and it will be open to access, so everyone can use it, and we'll be developing it as time continues. So this was an output from the work that was done over 2021, and it was really to map the living wage movements. So it's an independent effort designed to highlight the work of all of the different experts, all of the different organisations around the world, who can provide decision makers in employers, in government, in policy making, with guidance on the best practice for achieving living wages. It can be used by a number of different audiences, so employers can use it to identify the right partners to work with, to develop their strategies, regardless of where they are in their journey. And you'll see it's got a few different filters, so you can filter for your country that you're working in or your industry that you're working in. There's lots of ways of looking at the data. For civil society, lots of organisations focus on different parts of living wages and a lot around supply chain. So the Explorer can allow for confident cross-referral, where we have someone contact us, but we're not the main expert. We can look to the Explorer to see who might be and be able to cross-refer. For investors, so they're in a strong position of influence to motivate employers to implement living wages, and they can use the Explorer to identify KPIs relevant to their industry. And then finally, for policymakers, so governments consider living wage data in minimum wage setting, and can now look at different policies to highlight what's going on in the living wage space. So yeah, we will be demonstrating a preview of how to use this Digital Explorer at the event that Lisa has shared, and we really just want to continue to grow build on the data that's already here. So we just really encourage organisations who are working on living wages to submit their data into the survey that we have. And if you're also aware of any other organisations that aren't captured that are working on living wages, then please do feel free to share the survey as well. So we're just looking to grow this. It's going to be continuously kind of improving as we go. Fab. So really the last thing that I wanted just to run through is a bit of a call to action. So if you are a UK or US based employer, the best way to demonstrate your commitment to the living wage is to make sure that you're accredited where nationally recognised rates exist. If you're operating elsewhere, there are other national accreditation schemes that aren't yet affiliated, but that we're working with in Canada, Jersey and New Zealand. If there isn't a national approach yet, there's other living wage movements that exist or use the Global Living Wage Explorer to identify partners to work with. And the UN Global Compact actually has a really good 10-step guide on how to implement living wages across global operations as well. We can share that too. And then finally, if you are working on a living wage initiative, just please do get in touch. It would be great to have you represented on the map as well, so we can share all of the great work that everyone is doing. And so I think that now just leaves us with questions. But yes, thank you so much to everyone for joining us and to listening to all of this. And yeah, really interested to see what questions you have and to be able to share anything else. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And there's been interesting comments and questions on the chat too. So yeah, I just want to quickly remove the spotlight so that everybody can be seen. And yeah, this is the part where, you know, we all as a family of people that are really organic and flexible and interactive. So we really want you to take this opportunity to engage with Mona Lisa and Lauren, share your questions, your comments, your concerns if there are, and they can engage with you on that. So if you've got something to share or ask, please raise your hand. You can just use the feature at the bottom of the screen called raise hand under reactions, or you can just do this and I'll see you and you can unmute and share your question. So who wants to go first? There we go. Pushpanath. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, but you can unmute and please share your name and where you're from.
Thank you so much, and it's really good to know, and thank you for the opportunity to see such a lot of work being done on a very fundamental and crucial issue. I'm an anti-poverty activist and a climate justice one. I walk a different part of the world and talking about climate justice, which is very much part of and integral to the whole issue of fair wages, and I see Fair Trade International is part of it. So just to say that, and thank you and compliment that one. My question really is about, you know, significant part of the so-called economy in India or Africa is all within the informal sector. And, you know, it's almost, it may feel not only daunting, but sometimes it's quite an unfair thing to even ask them to say they themselves are earning far less. They're sacrificing massively their own manually, and they have forced to employ other people. So they have to actually really, you know, kind of, if you like, cut corners. And the one place where they cut corners is to pay less wages. So, you know, how are we, it's not like I'm thinking with you. I'm not saying you have to answer this question, but I think what you have done is well. And I also know now in my work in India on climate justice and fair trade, we are now started to have a whole silver line of organizations which are starting to pay fair wages. Yeah. So there are good examples. I would like to take your story to them because I'm a storyteller. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. And yeah, like it's so true. We don't necessarily have the answer for sort of the gig economy work yet, but it is something that we're looking at in the foundation. So I guess more UK specifically at the moment to understand what an approach could be for looking at informal work. But once we kind of develop that within the UK, it's definitely something that we would then look to talking to other national movements around as well. But yes, there's just so many parts to living wages and so many different types of work, especially through off the back of the pandemic and everything. So it's something that we're looking at, but unfortunately don't have all the answers for it yet. Yeah, but thank you for raising the question and for the work that you're doing as well.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate that. Yeah, Mona Lisa, you just wave if you're wanting to add. Otherwise, we'll go to Todd, who has his hand up.
Hello, I'm Todd. I'm from the US. I hope you don't mind, but I wrote out my question because it's just easier for me to communicate that way. And as I was processing my question while you were speaking, so I'm going to just read it. It seems like any discussion of a living wage should also include a conversation about the quality of work that is also being considered worthy of a living wage. A policy on living wage won't be very beneficial if it's only creating and sustaining jobs that destroy souls, offer no upward mobility, and glorify highly unethical companies like Amazon, which offers jobs that are dangerous and terribly monotonous. How do you consider this in your work? Where do you figure human happiness, fulfillment, and the sense of community in your measures of success. This is a well-being alliance, after all. As I understand it, typical measures of GDP and various other baskets of goods do not consider or encompass any sort of measures of success in human fulfillment. Personally, for me, I would rather earn no living wage at all if it means I am being coerced to work jobs that I hate or jobs that aren't aligned with my moral values, such as being environmentally sustainable and being not in support of neo-colonial military adventures overseas. I always think of my country here and its vast military bases all over the world. I just don't feel that any solutions about living wage can exclude considerations of human well-being and what human flourishing looks like. Interested in your thoughts on this, and thank you for considering my thoughts. Appreciate it.
No, it's a brilliant question. And I think the basket of goods that we have, it looks at social and cultural participation as well as some of the core fundamentals of, like housing and food and other kind of key things that you need to survive. So that's where we try and bring in that element of like, okay, let's not just talk about surviving, but let's talk about living as well. And that will vary in the UK, in the US, and in other countries where we're looking at living wages. Another angle that we're looking at that's sort of more specific to the UK is we've got an initiative called Living Hours. So it's sort of like the flip side of the wages conversation as well. So you're not getting burnt out by necessarily having like horrible numbers of hours, or that you're getting security in your job that provides you with like a decent rota, decent notice periods, and like a secure number of hours to be working as well. I wouldn't say we've looked at the different types of jobs necessarily, but I do think it's a really interesting angle to consider, and definitely one around some of the organizations that might not be beneficial to the environment or to other kind of social aspects of life as well. And Mona Lisa, I saw you kind of unmuted there as well, so let me know if you've got anything else to add to that too.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to add, first of all, thank you for your question, Todd. It's a very interesting angle to think about, especially kind of in the societies that we live in. We want to make sure that we're not just kind of promoting the idea that as long as you're being paid enough, that the work that you're doing is automatically morally, validated or anything like that. And to speak particularly with the point that you made around kind of how do we ensure that we are not recognizing organizations that may have a very negative impact on the environment or have human rights issues, or kind of, keep the legacy of colonialism going. We do have structures internally, at least in the UK, to kind of vet out organizations. So if there is an organization that wants to accredit with us, that has very public, has been publicly kind of associated with abuses or things like that, then we of course wouldn't be accrediting them, and we do have processes to guard against that. It's not just accrediting anybody that's doing the very bare minimum, which is paying enough so that their employees are taken care of. We do kind of think about, we have that screening process in place to make sure that that's kind of taken care of. So yeah, I just wanted to add that it's something that we're thinking about, and we absolutely need to find better ways of just promoting good work and good life as one and the same, and not something that's different.
Thank you. Yeah, really, really important question. And thanks for giving your feedback on that. Bruna, I think is how you pronounce it. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but you go next. Thank you.
Yeah, hi Tabea. Hi everyone. I'm grateful for being here. I'm Bruna from Brazil, and this subject interests me the most because it's really hard for us here in South America to calculate the living wage, and we do need it. So my question is about it. We really want to have the Living Wage Foundation calculus here for Latin America, and nowadays we have so many cases of labor analogous of slavery coming up here in Brazil. So we do need this right now. So I'd like to understand how is the process to develop the living wage calculus here in Brazil, in Latin America.
Great question. And this is something that we talk to organizations about, different interested individuals even, and some of our employers as well. So there's a number of different ways that you can kind of get started with it. And I guess I'll talk about a couple of different ones. Some are built from community movements. So if there are researchers and other kind of community organizations, civil society or trade unions even, that are looking at this concept of a living wage, it's about identifying those kind of key levers to bring into those conversations. We also work very closely with Loughborough University here in the UK, and they do part of our calculation, which is called the minimum income standard. And that's like very focus group led, with people within the local context. So for example, they would run focus groups here in the UK to understand more about what it means to people to have sort of decent standard of living. They can work with researchers in the local context, so in Brazil or any other places, to show the process that they basically run through to calculate the living wage here in the UK. And that's something that we've spoken to them before about doing in different countries too. And another option is we often get certain employers who are accredited with us in the UK and want to do it elsewhere. And a recent example is Japan, actually. So we had a number of employers that are interested in understanding what a living wage is in Japan. So we can help to convene people and talk around like how we can work together as a group, engage people in the local community, again, engaging those local research groups or civil society to look at how we would kind of build a movement or do some kind of calculations as well. So yeah, it's definitely possible. It does take work and time, but it's about identifying the right partners to work with, because it definitely, you can't do it on your own. It's all about bringing people with you and identifying who they are. So yeah, hope that helps, but happy to talk about it further. Oh, fab. Thank you, Mona Lisa, for sharing that as well. The UN Global Compact chapter in Brazil. And also use the tool when it comes out too. I will keep plugging that.
Wonderful. Yeah, Brian, I saw you popped some questions in the chat, so I'm hoping you're going to bring them up here.
That's exactly
live.
What I'm
Great.
And I'm thinking about this in terms from a macro basis, and especially if your programs become particularly successful, so that you guys become the rule instead of the exception, in living wages. Is there a worry about increases in consumerism and GDP? Because getting beyond GDP is one of the things we've been trying to look at in the WEAll community. And so it seems like there could be a point where this starts working against us in some way. So have you given some thought to that?
Yeah, so we ensure that the living wage rates doesn't increase necessarily in line with what inflation is and how a country is performing, but there's a lot of different factors that get taken into consideration when calculating the rates each year. So inflation will be looked at, as well as rising prices and other things like that, as well as different tax and benefits that are happening within that particular local context too, to ensure that it's all reflective of how the country is performing at that point in time, but also the benefits and taxes for the people that live there as well. So that's sort of how our living wage rates is kind of calculated and changed and updated each year. Does that answer your question? Because I'm not sure if I've kind of got that GDP link in there.
Yeah, it sounds like it's an in-depth analysis that you have to do in order to understand it. Okay, but yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
I wanted to also point out another question, which was around informal. Let me just scroll back to it. I think it was tied into your question, Brian, but it was raised by somebody else. Now I'm like scrolling. It was Jody saying they're doing this work within the informal economy. And so wondering whether the informal economy has been thought about as a stakeholder. So I was also interested in that I'm not too sure if you have an answer with regards to that.
Yeah, so this is definitely linked to the work that we're starting to do around the gig economy. And it also kind of appears in some of the other initiatives that we're doing as well. So for example, for living pensions, it's something that kind of gets captured within that too, because in the UK specifically, with like employer auto enrollment, it goes into like you get auto enrolled if you earn above a certain amount, and that doesn't capture people who are like working multiple jobs in a bit more of informal setting or in the gig economy setting. So it's in parts at the moment, but it is a project that we're looking at in our business development sort of team. So don't have loads of answers on it at the moment, but I know it's something that's being considered because there are a lot of complexities and nuances. And I guess another thing to say on that is for our directly employed, we accredit based on employers paying their directly employed staff, but also their third-party contracted staff. And in our accreditation policy, that we ensure that includes a lot of different things. So Mona Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's people who work at least, I think it's 2 hours a week for 8 weeks consecutively. So we hope that that captures some people that are more in informal work as well, but it's definitely something that we're looking at as sort of more of a project to understand more of the complexities in that space.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, it is a little bit more complex and there's so many nuances, as you say. Jodie, oh, sorry, did you want to add to that? Because I didn't realize you still here.
The thing that connected me was when you were talking about it in relation to the global value chains and the supply chain system. Because the fragmentation of some of these systems, I mean, it's called complexity, but effectively it's fragmentation into many, many microprocesses run by many, many different small, medium, and micro home workers. So everything gets pushed into that space. And certainly nothing's running at a living wage. So I think it's thinking about it up within the supply chain system and not just in the formal economy. And I think the subcontracting and those processes are really interesting. But I can't at the moment see a way through this other than shortening supply chain and the relationships that exist at the moment. But that's just where I'm at in terms of my thinking. But I think it does need to be done as a supply chain system, and rather than just in one sphere of the economy.
Completely agree. And though like it is challenging because our work in the foundation is very much centered around like own operations, directly employed staff and third-party contracted staff, but we are acutely aware that supply chain is so integral as well. And though we don't have like specific expertise in supply chain, we work with a lot of organizations that do, and that's why we're trying to like bring this sort of map together that can really point people into the direction where there's the best expertise as well. So though I don't have an answer for you on the supply chain piece, there are organizations that look at that specifically, and we're all just trying to promote each other's work and to share where some of that work is happening too.
Okay, great. And quick thoughts, anything you want to say on the UBI comment in the chat by France before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, universal basic income, that's a dream, isn't it? Yeah, it's I mean, I think, yeah, everyone has a different opinion on basic income. It's very government, like it's got to be decided at a government level. So all we're trying to do at the moment is ensure that we can at least influence pay from employers and have that realm of influence. But yeah, there's obviously many things to consider, and yeah, not much more unfortunately to say on that one. But I think, yeah, it's probably more of a government sort of decision in each location, but not something that we actively campaign for at the moment, no.
Thank you. And I know it is at the hour and just past, so we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for your time, for your slides, for all the information and the effort that you've put into this We really, really appreciate it. So a huge thank you to Living Wage Foundation and to everybody that joined us. We have our next WEAll talk on the 26th of April. So please look out for that information. It is with the Planetary Health Alliance, a very big network that is a member of ours, and we are a member of theirs. So that's really going to be an interesting one. Simon Ticehurst, our movements lead, is going to be chairing that because Planetary Health Alliance is a huge network, and we're really wanting to make that link around planetary health and economic systems change. So hopefully you can join us April 26th. And if you don't know anything about WEAll or you're new here, please give me an email so I can chat to you more. My email address is tobile@weall.org. So I'll just pop it into the chat. And we are obviously recording this, so we will definitely put this onto the YouTube channel so we can share it. You can share it with your networks, and to anyone that missed this session, they'll be able to watch it at a later date. So yeah, that's it from us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Lovely to meet you all.
Yes, lovely to speak. Thank you.